Hello everyone. So in this video, we are going to talk about how do I usually choose a state management solution for my project. There are 4 key points which I consider whenever I try to choose a state management solution or even though any library for my project. So the first one is basically that we need to acknowledge and understand that there is no perfect solution out there. So you won't find any library which covers all your edge cases and situation. You need to understand your domain and project knowledge, and based on that you choose the library. Basically, like 80% of use case should cover a library for your project. And this comes to basically choosing the right trade-off. Programming is all about choosing the right trade-off, wherever to use what and when. And to do that, use your existing testing and refactoring knowledge to make that decision. And the last one is that I look into a library and see how easy it makes testing, because at the end we want to have a test as a safety net for our code so that we can make changes or accommodate changes very easily on existing code as a test as a safety net. So as I said, the programming is all about trade-off, when to choose the right trade-off. And the first thing when choosing about the state management library is basically the code design decision, how the library has been designed. And basically, since you are going to use throughout your whole app, you need to understand how will it impact your project. And this is basically your heart and soul of your project, because if things go wrong here, then basically it's not a good thing. Your whole project might collapse because of that. So you need to be really cautious about choosing that and thinking about how it matches the design with your existing project. And sometimes choosing this code design decision becomes so difficult that developers try to avoid it completely. That is basically they don't want to use any state management library and rather build everything from scratch, because having this code design decision will require a step-by-step process, and sometimes it's not a good idea and people just give up that idea and start rebuild from scratch. So my advice on that would be that don't build from scratch, and because this never works. And there are big tech who have tried to do that, a big rewrite, but it never worked. Majority of the time it never works, because you tend to do the same mistake which you did earlier in the project. The better would be just to start a small bit by bit and improve screen by screen basis or layer by layer basis. So there is a good blog on Joylon Software basically which describe why the rewrite is not a good thing and why the chances of failing them is higher. Now, how do you make those code design decision effectively is basically using your existing knowledge. So by existing knowledge, I mean, since you are working on that domain and project, you might be having the knowledge about how things are connected and coupled, because you did a lot of testing and refactoring. So while doing this testing and refactoring, you really understand the pain point in the project. For example, in our case, when we were trying to test the home screen, there were a lot of issues with mocking and faking the dependency, like the app database which was fetching the values from the database. So for us it was very difficult to replace that dependency in test with a fake or mock. So this is one of the pain point which we see, and existing on that pinpoint we can figure it out what kind of state management library will solve that problem for us. So this is just one example, but if you work on a project for around quite a month, you really get the pain point of that project. So use that knowledge to choose the state management library. And always remember that architecture is never done. So even though you choose the right management solution or any library, chances are there that in future it's going to change, because software is soft and it's going to change very frequently. So there will be some feature requirement, or there will be some completely new flow for your product or the project you are building. So you might need to change the architecture based on that. So just don't assume that once you have chosen this, then it's written on a stone. Basically, as the time passes by, you need to make accommodate or do a changes for your architecture as well. So now the last point is about testing, which I emphasize a lot more. So whenever you choose a state management library, just look at how easy is it for testing. And the first thing which basically I see is basically how easy it's to replace the dependencies, because software tend to become hard to change when you have a lot of dependency tangled together. So first thing in order to test thing is to understand how we can replace dependency in a production and test environment. And then I check the testing of the package which I'm using, how much code coverage it has for that package. And if they have a really good number of test code coverage covering that part, then it's a good sign that it's a really healthy package, and they think about, you know, not breaking the API a lot. So let me give you an example how I usually look for a state management solution. First, I usually go to their website. Basically, in case, for example, we are choosing Riverpod here, I just look at the home page that what it tried to accomplish. And this is a really good example on how it showcased the simple use case. For example, whenever we check for a Flutter app, there is a counter app example, and this is basically show that how can you use a provider to increment your counter here. So this is a really good example to just get an idea on how I can simply get started. And then I look to their documentation that how I can get started. And if I see, there are three ways basically I use Riverpod, which is basically Flutter only with Flutter hooks and Dart only. So this also gives you a good idea that how package has divided into different types of use cases. Currently I don't need for Dart only, and I don't need Flutter hooks. So I'll be just looking into a Flutter only Riverpod. So I'll just see how I can install it. So I basically need to add these dependencies, and then I'll just look into some small examples on how they can use the provider in the app. And after looking at and glance at it, I'll just directly usually jump into the testing section. So I look for a documentation around testing. So if I go here, I'll find that there is a guide around testing. And this is a really good sign for package being maintained well, because they focus on testing. And this also showcase that, for example, I came here, it's showcase the best practices on no shade should be preserved between test and widget. So this is really a good sign that they are focusing more on quality of a code and testing as a first priority. So I'll just look into it that how they can use in different kind of tests. For example, in Flutter, they used in a how can we use in a test widget with a different state, different provider, and like here is the thing which I am usually looking for because of the pain point we have from our code base, which is basically replacing the dependencies. So if I see here, it's showcased that overriding the behavior of provider during test, which is basically this, that how you can, you know, have a repository provider, which is in our case would be an app database or a network API call, and then we can override with the fake repository very easily. And there are some other use case as well, different providers. And after looking into this documentation, I usually go to their repository, which is basically this Riverpod. And if I go into their folder structure, there is a package, and since we are using Flutter Riverpod package, I'll just go into that package, and then I'll just look into test folder, and then I'll try to see how much test they have covered. So basically I see here that they have pretty much covered test for all the variant they have for the provider and different test cases. So this seems to be a really nice package to have for a state management solution, and this is how usually I look around for it. And sometimes just want to go beyond that, I just also check the issues, how much active that repository is, what kind of issue people are having, how the author is pointing to those issues, how many issues have been closed. So here if we can see there 831 issue closed, which is also another good sign that this author is maintaining this package in a very good manner. They are just trying to close much of issues as possible. So this is how I usually look into the documentation and their source code. So as I have showcased how I usually go through the documentation, my one advice would be always try to read from an official documentation. I feel there are two ways to learn things. Is basically there's a fast paced and slow pace. Basically, if the fast pace is like YouTube tutorial, sample code to get started quickly, but the slow pace one is basically official documentation, reading books, and having a strong fundamental. Both approach have there is pros and cons. Like the first one will get you started quickly, and the second one will be help you in a long term. I would always recommend go through the official documentation first and try to implement that. From my personal experience, I have faced many issues in the library or a code base until unless I fall upon their official documentation and then figure out, oh, this was so simple, but I was not just reading the document. First, try to understand the official document, and if you really don't understand what it is, then I would suggest to try a YouTube video or someone else's blog post. But first, always try official documentation. So to summarize, there is no perfect solution out there. There always be some feature which you might not be finding in the state management library or any package, because you need to choose a right trade-off based on your project and domain knowledge, and you get that domain knowledge from doing some testing and refactoring to your existing code, which will allow you to understand the pain point and which will allow you to choose the right trade-off. And then when choosing the state management library, just look at how easy it make for testing. So yeah, that's it. That's how I choose any state management library or any package. Thank you. See you in the next video.
So in this video, we talked about how to choose a state management solution, where we see Riverpod as a good solution for our use case. So in our next video, we'll talk about how to migrate our existing state management solution to Riverpod. So stay tuned and thank you.
So if you like this video, then please like, share and subscribe. Thank you.